Hi everyone, my name is Jenny and I'm back today to do another video. Today is going to be, as you can see from the title of this video, the vlog for my Booktube Prize 2021 Octofinals round. So for this round, I'm judging Nonfiction Group H. It is February 1st right now, and it is actually my birthday, so happy birthday to me. I'm officially 24, which is exciting, but I thought since I was just starting the first book, which is Our Bodies, Their Battlefields, that I would kind of go through and just start this vlog off and talk about my kind of initial thoughts about the 6 books that are in my group, as well as kind of my reading plans for the books moving forward. So of the 48 books I think there are on the long list, I actually have already read one of the nonfiction books. I've read like 10 or 11 of the fiction books, but I'm judging nonfiction, as I've already said. And the one book that I've read on the nonfiction long list is The Third Rainbow Girl, which I read last year in Nonfiction November and absolutely loved. And I gave this 4.5 stars. It was my favorite nonfiction book that I read last year. So I was super excited that this book is in the group that I'm judging. So I will only have 5 books that I have to read. I will put a link to my favorite books of the year video, as well as my nonfiction November wrap up too, so you can hear kind of more of my thoughts about this. But I did thoroughly enjoy this, but at the same time I do think a lot of what I enjoyed about this was very much like me and my interests and the ways that those intersect with Emma Copley Eisenberg's interests. And I'm not entirely sure if someone who doesn't have these ties to West Virginia and thinking about kind of placemaking more broadly, which are both things that I'm interested in, would find this all that engaging, particularly in terms of a non-US audience, because I think West Virginia within the US audience is already kind of a niche topic, but then like a specific state in the US for international audiences, I'm just not sure would care about this literally at all. Plus it has this true crime element, but the true crime element is not really the central focus of this narrative in my mind. So will be intrigued to see what other people in my group think about this one, but I really enjoyed it. It's definitely my #1 pick right now. So I have already read this one, which is exciting. And then, as I just said, I've just started this one today. I've decided that I'm only going to probably read about a chapter a day because, and there are, let's see, I think like 15-ish chapters. Yeah, there's 15 chapters, just because this one is pretty much exclusively about rape and sexual assault in its impacts on women, particularly as it's used in warfare, which is a pretty intense topic. Definitely one that I think is super important, but one that I don't want to rush through because I think there's gonna be a lot of really intense stuff in here, and I want to kind of take it in and process it and not just kind of read it really quickly. So I'm excited that this one was available right away from my library, so I can kind of get it both out of the way, but also have some time to like process it and not be rushing through it at the end. But I am excited about this one. I think, as I said, it'll be pretty hard hitting, but I do think that given Christina Lamb is a journalist, this hopefully will be pretty well done and engaging despite the pretty dark subject matter. So there is this one. I have pretty high hopes for this. The other one that I've actually just started today also is Eleanor by David Michaelis. This is a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, who is a historical figure that I know some stuff about but don't know a ton about. I am interested in FDR's presidency a little bit in terms of like the New Deal and thinking about social welfare programs and like the role of government, so I think that's interesting. I also think Eleanor Roosevelt and her likely homosexuality or bisexuality is pretty interesting. So I'm hoping that those two things kind of get discussed a lot in this biography. But other than that, I don't really find FDR and Eleanor to be that interesting. Well, I also find the fact that they're cousins to be kind of interesting, which we've already in the first chapter, which I just listened to. I'm listening to this one on audio. They have already met, so I guess they've known each other basically since childhood and been close friends, which I can't remember if they're first cousins or second cousins. They were very close cousins, if my US history knowledge is serving me. So I'm intrigued about this one. I don't love biographies usually unless it's pretty short and about a person who I'm super interested in, so I'm not sure this one will go very well for me, but since it's in my group I do have to read it, and I'll be listening to the audiobook, which I also don't love. It seems like a really heavily edited audiobook, which I always hate because I'm not the biggest audio listener to begin with, but like there's very obvious cuts where her tone changes really dramatically and it's very off-putting to listen to. So those are my preliminary thoughts on that one so far. And then there's 3 other ones. So the first one is The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson. This one I ordered in my February Book of the Month box. This one, again, I'm not super excited about because I don't really care about World War II, as I have discussed previously. I think I talked about that in my February TBR video, but I don't love World War II. I don't find it that interesting. Particularly don't find like London as a place where the war happened to be that interesting. I'm pretty sure this book heavily features the Blitz and Winston Churchill, as those two things are mentioned by name in the subtitle. So I'm intrigued about this one, not super excited about it, but I have heard really good things about Eric Larson. He just has never written a book about a historical time period that I was super interested in, but I am excited to give his work a try because I do know that he's very well beloved in like the nonfiction reading community. And then the other two are Lucy Crawford's Notes on a Silencing. This one will be interesting because it is a sexual assault memoir, which I was actually reading an article, I can't remember, I think it was an interview with her that kind of started being like sexual assault memoirs are like the big buzzy thing these days, but this one is different. And I was like, will it really be different though? I mean, obviously I do not want to diminish or minimize anyone's experiences, particularly as they relate to sexual assault and sexual violence. Like, that's not something that I'm about. But at the same time, reading about an upper middle class woman at a boarding school in New England who's white, I'm not sure that's for me, but I'm gonna have an open mind about it and try it. This one I believe I'll be listening to on audio if my audiobook comes in. If not, I'm gonna try to get it from the library because I don't really want to buy a copy of this one because memoirs in general are not really my jam. So yeah, this one I'm less than excited about as well. And then the last one, which is Barbara Demick's Eat the Buddha, I am very excited about because I'm very intrigued about Tibet and its relationship with China. Tibet has become an area of interest for me. I mean, that whole area within the Himalayas, Kashmir, Tibet, all is very fascinating to me, and definitely an area of the world that I think will become very interesting geopolitically within the next like 100 years or so, 50 years even. So I am very excited to read this one and kind of learn more about Tibet and its resistance to China's communism. I believe that's a heavy theme in here, is kind of anti-communist activism in Tibet. That is another one that I am excited about, and definitely I think actually will probably be buying a copy unless I did place library holds on all of these books, but this one may or may not come in time. So if it doesn't come in by the end of February, I definitely will be buying a copy of this one because I am intrigued about it, and I also think my dad would want to read this one as well because it sounds very interesting. So those are kind of my introductory thoughts on all of these books. So I will kind of keep you updated as I move along in Our Bodies, Their Battlefields, and Eleanor, and will let you know once I kind of reach like the 50% mark or so of those two books. So I think this is the first time that I am checking in for my Booktube Prize reading vlog, and I'm part of the way through 2 of the 5 books that I have left to read, so I thought I would just kind of update you. The one that I'm furthest along in is Eleanor by David Michaelis. I'm about 70% of the way through this audiobook, and I'm enjoying this one. I think it's well written, it's engaging, I'm learning some new stuff about Eleanor Roosevelt. Again, as I think I said in my first clip, I can't quite remember, this is not the type of book that I would necessarily pick up. Like, I don't have a super strong interest to learn more about Eleanor Roosevelt, nor do I really love biographies, and I think the limitations of biography and the typical things that are found in biographies are definitely present in this work, which makes it somewhat of a like difficult text to engage with, just because it really is covering everything about Eleanor Roosevelt's life and not making a ton of like commentary on kind of the greater things that were happening at the time. I do think it's portraying a lot of the people in Eleanor's life in ways that I didn't quite think of them previously, which obviously is a benefit of a biography, and it definitely is teaching me more about Eleanor and her kind of social values and how those were presented and how she used her platform through FDR to kind of forward a lot of those values in America. I also just got in the hold for the audiobook of Notes of a Silencing by Lucy Crawford. I've not even started this one yet because I only listen to one audiobook at a time, so that'll be kind of a next docket book for the Booktube Prize. I also have been slowly plodding through Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb, and that's what I have to say, not really enjoying. It's not a fun reading experience. Obviously the topic of like rape as a type of war crime is not great, and there's a lot of very graphic descriptions of what all of these women have gone through. Well, it's important for these women if they are like willing and open to share their stories. I think that is a valuable thing for them. However, I do at times feel like this book just reads a bit too exploitative of these narratives, particularly given that the focus is so like on the non-Western world, despite the fact that this is not a problem that's like localized to the non-Western world, if that makes sense. So I found there's book has brought up a lot of kind of interesting thoughts for me about the role of like the Western gaze on the non-Western world, and how Christina Lamb is kind of falling into a lot of traps that I don't particularly love, of saying, kind of othering herself from these problems, particularly as like a British journalist, given that many of the countries that we're talking about here are former British colonies, and in large part the kind of civil unrest and political instability that is present in that country is in large part due to the way that the British Empire left that country and kind of forced certain groups into power upon the country's independence. Like, that is not really something that she touches on a ton in here. In fact, she actually had a quote from someone from Boko Haram in Nigeria. She actually mentions that the leader of Boko Haram, at least at the time that she was kind of there doing her research, actually like directly cited the British colonial system in Nigeria as part of the reason that Boko Haram is doing what it's doing. And so she doesn't investigate that at all as like, why are there so many very anti-Western Muslim revolutions happening throughout the world, is a question that I think we should be investigating further, and she is not touching on really at all in this book. I also, again, just find the way that she talks to the women and about the women feels very othering to me and exploitative of their stories and their trauma and suffering in ways that I don't particularly love. So not really a fan of this one, would not really recommend it. I am about 161 pages into it, and I can only read about 10 pages at a time before it just gets like too intense for me, but I do have this one until the end of the month, so I'll be slowly working my way through this one. I have a feeling it'll probably be the last one on my list right now, just because I don't imagine any of these books creating such a strong negative reaction in terms of the like way that the author is approaching the subject for me, but we'll see. But yeah, I just find that the way Christina Lamb's approaching this topic to feel a little bit too kind of British white lady coming in to save these poor Muslim and non-Muslim women, which I don't love. There also is a little bit of like equating Muslim people with extremism, which I also don't love, because I think that is also a narrative that the West really likes to push, and is obviously not true, because there's millions if not billions of people in the world that practice Islam that are not Muslim extremists. So yeah, not really loving that one. And then I do, as I said, I have Notes on a Silencing. I also was able to track down a copy of Eat the Buddha by Barbara Demick. This was like sold out everywhere that I shop for books. Even like Amazon had this sold out, but Barnes & Noble didn't. They had like so many copies, so don't know what's happening with Barnes & Noble. Hope they're okay, but I am excited about this one. This is the one that I was most looking forward to, so I might dig into this one next after I finish Our Bodies, Their Battlefields, or I might dig into this chunker, The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larsen, which was one that I was not super excited about, but I think actually having read this Eleanor biography and been a bit more well-versed in World War II and the kind of politics between Europe and America, which was actually just discussed in the audiobook, I think might make this one a little more engaging. And I've heard that this one reads to kind of more like a narrative, almost fiction style, similar to what I've been enjoying about the Eleanor biography. So I think this one will probably be the one that I dig into next, particularly just because it's so giant. I mean, it has a lot of notes at the end. It actually doesn't have a ton of notes for how long the book is, but this, I'm trying to find, like, this is the breakdown. So I mean, there's a lot of text for like not a whole lot of notes actually, so I definitely will want to dedicate a fair amount of time to this one. So that's probably the one I'll be reading next. As I said, I think previously, it's the 14th of February, so I still have like a month and a half-ish, maybe a little less than that, to finish the rest of these books, so I'm not at all concerned. The Eleanor biography was definitely the one that I was most concerned about, and honestly it's been reading pretty quickly for me. It's pretty easy to get through, so I am gonna kind of continue trekking along. Hey everyone, it is the 24th of February. As you can see here in Atlanta, it is like springtime now, so I thought I would take the opportunity to vlog outside, although usually the audio quality when I'm outside is not nearly as good, so I'm sorry in advance if this clip is not the best audio quality, but I realized I hadn't updated this vlog for a while, and I have some book related updates to the Booktube Prize that I need to share, so I thought I would quickly do that now. The first of which is that this past Friday, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, but this past Friday, or in the recent past, I finished Eleanor by David Michaelis, and this one I actually ended up enjoying a lot more than I initially anticipated that I would. I thought that this would be kind of more dry, you know, typical biography, or what I think of as a biography, and this was a lot more engaging and interesting. Obviously, I think that's in large part due to Eleanor Roosevelt being an interesting person on her own, but I thought this was pretty well written and definitely I think surprised me more than I was expecting to. So in the end I did give it 4 stars, and I would recommend it if you are a fan of biographies and are interested in learning more about Eleanor Roosevelt. I feel like this was a pretty solid biography of her. My main critiques of it, as I think I've mentioned previously, I listened to it on audio and I would not entirely recommend that, as there were different times, and I kind of talked about this with my family and we were debating whether it was an intonation thing or like weird choppy editing thing, but there were times when the audiobook narrator's voice would sound vastly different than it had just like the word previously. So there would be like small chunks of half of a sentence that were said in a really different tone, or that sounded like were really choppily kind of put together, which I didn't really appreciate. Additionally, this book, and I think this is kind of a critique of the book in general, but particularly this was pertinent in the audiobook, what is that David Michaelis, in writing this book, does not really reintroduce characters who is introduced previously, which I always find helpful in a biography, because especially a person like Eleanor Roosevelt, who I'm familiar with, and I'm obviously familiar with FDR and Teddy Roosevelt, but I'm not super familiar with a lot of the other kind of key players of the time, aside from like the presidents and their wives. But there were a lot of people that Eleanor was involved with, both familially and professionally, and a lot of those people get introduced, and then once they're introduced, we're just supposed to expect to know who they are. And I do think if you're reading the physical edition of this book, I like saw it at Barnes & Noble, so there's a list of the pertinent characters and like a family tree and stuff, so I think that information would make this a better book to read physically, or like read as an ebook as opposed to listening to it as an audiobook, because I found it difficult to remember who he was talking about, because he just didn't feel the need to reintroduce people who we had already previously met. But this book is like 500 pages, so there's a lot of people that you've met over the course of the book, and they kind of leave and enter Eleanor's life throughout. So that was another critique I had. And then finally, on a related note, I noticed this only after I read it in a separate review, which is that he calls the same person sometimes multiple different names over the course of the text, which is also a bit confusing for remembering who people were. So I think that's my biggest critique, is that this book did not do a great job of reminding the reader who the different people were aside from Eleanor and FDR, who, like, obviously if you are reading this biography, I assume you know who those people are, but everyone else, I don't feel like he really did justice in terms of reinforcing who these people were and what their relationship was, both like familially, as I said, or professionally to Eleanor. So that was my kind of main critique of that book, but otherwise I did really enjoy it, and I do think that it could potentially rank pretty highly. But the one audiobook that I've started next is Notes on Silencing by Lacey. I should have looked up her last name, but I don't remember it, but I will put the cover here so you can see it. But I think I've previously said her name was Lucy, but it's actually Lacey. And this is a memoir of Lacey, who went to St. Paul's, which is a boarding school in New Hampshire, and it is primarily about her experience as a sexual assault survivor in her high school environment. She was 15 years old when 2 older seniors from the school sexually assaulted her, and she goes into the kind of very kind of medical jargony description of that right at the beginning of the book. So obviously trigger warnings for sexual assault, but the book also kind of seems more focused on unpacking her own privilege and talking about the ideas of privilege and the way that they present themselves in a private, very elite college preparatory boarding school, which I'm not sure people who are not from the United States, which actually it's interesting, this feels like a very US centric, in part, Booktube Prize group, which is interesting given that not all of the judges are in the United States. But obviously it's pretty, the Booktube Prize in general is a pretty US centric prize, but that's been something I've been thinking about as I kind of am processing my thoughts on all 6 of these books. But the Notes on Silencing is in large part kind of unpacking these ideas of privilege, and I do kind of want to push back a little bit on some of the things she's saying, because I do feel like she's trying to excuse and pull herself out of that narrative, where she's not given me enough information to understand that she's not also coming from a place of privilege. And so I think there is some kind of nuance there that I wish would be made a bit more clear, of whether she herself feels very privileged for going to this school, or if she received financial aid to go to the school. Like that, those kind of lines are a bit blurred, which I am a bit frustrated with. But overall, I do find this to be a pretty engaging memoir. Again, this was one that I didn't think I would like very much, and I'm definitely enjoying it more. I think unless things take a turn for the worse, I'll probably end up giving this one 4 stars as well. So I feel like Eleanor and Notes on Silencing may be kind of in contention with one another. I'm not entirely sure right now where I would place the 2 of them relative to the rest of the books, obviously because I haven't finished them, but Both of them I feel very similarly about, in that I think that they are solid books that overall I did enjoy or am enjoying. I mean, enjoying feels like an odd word to use for Notes on a Silencing, but it's the word that came to mind. So there is that one. I'm about 30% of the way through that, and it's going by much quicker than I anticipated. It's like 400 pages or something, and as I said, I'm about 30% of the way through, and that's mainly just been when I'm like at work and have time that's free, or a couple days ago I was like working on my bullet journal spreads while at work. For those of you that don't know, I'm like a nanny type person for some kids doing virtual school, so I have a lot of time during the school day when I mainly needed to like get construction paper and like scissors and stuff, and don't have like a lot of active duties for several hours. So I have a lot of kind of reading audiobook time with my current work situation. I'm enjoying that one. We'll kind of continue to update you on it. Unfortunately, I really am not enjoying Our Buddies, Their Battlefields, which I believe I have mentioned previously, so I'm not going to go into a ton of depth of it here. But yeah, I'm pretty sure this will be my last pick. Right now I'm settled on like a 2.5 star for it, and I have debated, because I've processed a lot of my thoughts on it. Sorry, I put the book down. I've processed a lot of my thoughts on it, and I don't think those thoughts will change, but I may save them until I fully complete the book. I have, let's see, I'm on page 267 right now of like 338 pages of text, so I only have about, how many pages is that? It's like 60 pages left. So I do have, and I'm like halfway through one chapter, and then I think I have 2 chapters left maybe. But yeah, I'm really not enjoying this one. I think there's a lot of issues with it that, had a different person written this book, I think would have contextualized and positioned themselves more appropriately than I feel Christina Lamb has. So that's kind of a snippet. Obviously you will probably see me delving into my thoughts on this one next, as in terms of like how vlogs work, but I haven't finished it yet, so I don't want to go into those thoughts right now. But yeah, right now I'm sitting on like a 2.5 star for this. Honestly, at times my thoughts go as low as a 1 star, just because it does feel so graphic, to the point of it being exploitative, that I'm like, this is not appropriate for this book to have been published, and for these people's stories to be, you know, exploited in this way. Gosh. So yeah, that is a preview of my thoughts to come, but I am really not enjoying this one. After this one though, I will, but it is due back at the library this weekend, so I have to finish it, and I'll probably read more of it. Honestly, maybe I'll read more of it right now. I honestly do like skim all the graphic descriptions, just because I can't handle it. Especially this past chapter, we've been in the Congo, and there have been graphic descriptions of very, very young children, like 2 years old and under, being sexually assaulted, and personally, that's a place that I cannot go with my mind. So I skip those parts, and just kind of read through adult people talking about the horrors, and less so the graphic descriptions of what actually took place. That's about all I have to update you on. I definitely will give you my full thoughts when I finish this. Probably that'll be the next clip you see, unless I really finish a lot of Notes on a Silencing. And then I think Splendid and the Vile will be the next book I read. I just finished this book, and I have to say, for a book that really doesn't touch at all on like the ways in which colonialism created a lot of the political instability that has caused a lot of these civil wars that are mentioned in this book, like really no mentions of that whatsoever. This book has a lot of neo-colonial militaristic solutions for a problem that to me just doesn't seem like it's best solved using more military and infighting. She quoted someone who's high up in the UK government in the afterword, who's like, if we're going to go save Afghanistan, and it's like, well, perhaps that is what is causing this problem in the first place, but okay. Yeah, not a fan of this one. We'll hopefully talk about it more soon. Hi everyone, so it is the 6th of March. I just finished filming my February wrap-up, so I thought it would be a great time to also update this vlog, as it's been quite a while. I don't know when I last filmed an update, but it was probably like 2 weeks or so ago. I mean, obviously you will know because I'll have put the date, but it's been several weeks, and I have several Booktube Prize related updates to share. So let's just get into them. So the first of which is that I did finish Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb, which I immediately had to return to the library, so I don't have my physical copy anymore, and I hated this book. I thought it was awful. I gave it 1.5 stars, and I don't want to rant about it for a super long time, and I definitely don't want to sound like I'm minimizing the experiences of the women that are depicted in this book, as the only gripes I had with this book were the way that Christina Lamb approached the subject matter and the lack of tact that I felt like she had in discussing any of these topics, and also the lack of nuance that I felt in terms of the way that she kind of takes an ahistorical approach to a topic that I see as inherently compounded by the historical factors at play. And as with all of the instances of sexual violence against women, I felt were intentionally written to disturb the white, well-educated, Western, liberal to semi-liberal audience that this book is intended for. And Lamb actually says as much in the afterword, and all of the blurbs in the back of the book are talking about how disturbing it is, which felt to me a little iffy given the lack of kind of cultural context that the book has. Several of the regions of geopolitical instability mentioned in this book were former British colonies. If not British, all the countries have had some or still have some major military presence from the global north, particularly the United States. Yet the role Britain had in shaping the politics of these regions, which include the DRC, Rwanda, Argentina, Bangladesh, Syria, Iraq, Bosnia, I can't remember any others, but there were a few others I think that were also included. Oh, Boko Haram in Nigeria/Chad. The role that Britain had in shaping the politics of these regions goes completely undiscussed. The British colonial forces were often the people that put a particular ethnic group into power in this region, and that is what is causing a lot of the political instability that those regions have experienced in the recent past or are currently experiencing, and therefore one of the major causes of a lot of the sexual assault that these women are experiencing. While I understand providing the history to better contextualize these conflicts was not necessarily a requirement for writing this book, it struck out to me as a major missed opportunity. I was struck down of the fact that this work is exclusively focused on non-Western assaulters. The closest we get to the US, UK, Western Europe is Russian soldiers in World War II. So after Germany was declared to have lost the war, Russian soldiers apparently did sexually assault a number of German women en masse in Berlin. And while Russian people are white and they are previously kind of had a positive relationship with the West, including the US and the UK, I do feel like it was very intentional on Lamb's part, or at least it read to me, that Russia is now a place that is not have a good political relationship with the United States and the United Kingdom. And so I feel like they are definitely considered other from us in terms of where we sit in the global political scheme. So that deeply frustrated me, given the fact that I'm sure that the US and the UK have had military that have sexually assaulted / raped / taken sexual slaves from pretty much every country plus more that are mentioned in this book, and that is not discussed in the slightest. And then finally, this book just had no organization whatsoever. It jumped through time and place kind of at random. It would often return to a place despite the fact that we'd spent several chapters somewhere else, which I found intriguing. It also just didn't really have a thesis of sorts. I feel like Christina Lamb didn't know how much of herself to include in the book, and whatever she did include of herself I didn't find necessary. In fact, it made me dislike her more because she just felt, again, she really showed her cards in terms of not understanding the positionality and the greater context of a lot of these conflicts when she inserted herself. I didn't like it, was not a fan, gave it 1.5 stars. Definitely the bottom of my ranking. I hope that no other book makes me as angered as that one did. Then for the two books that I'm still currently reading, I am currently reading Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford. This one I'm about 60% of the way through the audiobook, but it is due later this week, so I should be finishing it hopefully at some point in the next couple days. And I'm finding this one intriguing. It's definitely not an enjoyable read, as Lacey Crawford's experience at her college prep boarding school definitely was not a positive one, and she is very explicit in the ways that the school and kind of privilege itself has failed her. So I am enjoying a lot of the kind of discussions she has. I do feel like at some points the conversation surrounding privilege gets a little muddled, and I will kind of be thinking more on that as I finish the book, but I do think that this one will rank pretty highly as it stands right now. I am intrigued to kind of get more into how St. Paul's explicitly kind of silenced her once she has kind of come forward with a lot of the sexual assault that she experienced there, which has not yet happened, but I think it's supposed to happen in this last third of the book. So I will check in more about that one once I have finished. And then I also, at the beginning of March, started The Splendid and the Vile, which is quite a chonker, and I've only read I've read about 90 pages of this one, and there's about 500. I have, as you can see, like tabbed it, so the pink are the ones that I have to finish by the end of this weekend. It is Saturday right now, so hopefully I'll be able to finish this section by the end of this weekend, which I don't think will be a problem, but we will see. And this one I am enjoying, I would say. It is jumping around a little bit, which I don't particularly love because this is not a part of history that I know a ton about, like specifically like London and the Blitz. I mean, I know the general basics, but I don't know a lot of the kind of individual players besides Winston Churchill, so it is kind of name dropping people a little bit, but I do find it like pretty readable as a history. It's definitely written for a like larger audience than some history books are, so I am enjoying that aspect of it. Like, it's a very readable book, which is good. I'm glad because it is quite a long book as well. There's that one. I'm pretty sure I will continue to enjoy it. I don't foresee it being one that I end up disliking, although you never know. So I am kind of curious as to how my rankings will stand by the end. None of the books so far to me have been better than The Third Rainbow Girl, which I read last year and really enjoyed. But some of the other books, like aside from my number 1 and my number 6 right now, the 2 through 5 are kind of all up in the air. So hopefully they'll kind of become more clear to me as I continue on through my reading, and I will check in with you shortly. Hi all, so it is March 12th, so I think it's been about a week maybe since I last checked in, and I have more updates to share with you. The main thing that I wanted to update you on is that I finished Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford. I thought it was a really valuable reading experience, and right now this one is actually number 2 on my list. I really thought this was well done. I feel like Lacey Crawford does a great job of conveying the story and discussing her complicated feelings about it. I think it's very clear to me, and I also listened to this on audio, as I think I've mentioned previously, and Lacey Crawford narrates the audiobook, so I feel like that added to the experience as well, because it was really hearing her perspective on things. She feels, in listening to the story, that she's pretty emotionally removed from the sexual assault. Like, it's not something that she has to grapple with any longer on a day-to-day basis, but I think she's now in her like late 40s / early 50s, and so she's, you know, seen a therapist, discussed it with a lot of people, and kind of come to terms with it, and so it has a bit of a kind of removed sense from the actual event itself, and is much more about the kind of reflections on both her experience at St. Paul's more broadly, but also about the silencing that took place at St. Paul's, which was definitely the most interesting part for me. I found the whole discussion surrounding every bit of wrongdoing and just shadiness that St. Paul's took part in to be incredibly frustrating, just because that is something that is ubiquitous across so many different institutions of all types, from the Catholic Church to these college prep schools to the government. You know, all of these places are kind of gatekept from really acknowledging the like sexual violence that takes place within these cultures, and so I found that really interesting. Her kind of really laying bare everything that St. Paul's did that they knew was wrong, and kind of discussing the ways that even the connections that St. Paul's has to these other institutions, such as the police and the government. You know, even the U.S. Attorney General's office is connected to St. Paul's because there are alumni that work in the U.S. Attorney General's office from St. Paul's that had a positive experience. And so that kind of discussion of like alumni connections and connections more broadly, and the kind of like insidious nature of those types of connections, I think was a really pivotal part of this memoir, and something that I really appreciated. I will say my one critique of it is that I think there's a lot of discussion here that, one, made the book a little too long, and two, there was a lot of discussion here about the wealth and privilege that a lot of the students at St. Paul's have. I feel like she was trying to make a point about the like culture of privilege that exists in these types of institutions, but I feel like she, in doing so, also kind of laid bare her own privilege in attending this institution that she then did not kind of critically engage with. I kind of wanted her to dig more into that element of her own background more so, or kind of cut out that discussion and the lavish descriptions of some of the places she went because of the connections of her fellow students. But overall, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, obviously do tread with caution if reading about sexual assault is something that's uncomfortable for you, or something that you can't read, because that is obviously the entire kind of premise of this memoir, particularly as it relates to kind of institutions of privilege and wealth. But I thought it was really well done, and definitely I think the sexual assault is discussed in very like medical jargony terms, which I also thought was very interesting. You can see a lot of her kind of digging back into this topic was through a very formal lens through like police investigations and examining medical records and stuff, and so there's a lot of very medical jargony and like legal jargony language in here. And then I'm still reading The Splendid and the Vile. Don't have a ton more to say about this one, although I do think it will fall kind of more in like the middle part of my list. I am still like enjoying this one, and I do think that it is a valuable read for people who liked World War II, like kind of very specific like political strategies, political machinations, military, you know, strategic moves, I guess is the best way to describe it, which is just not really something that interests me in the slightest. And so I'm finding the most interesting parts the kind of personal, interpersonal relationships discussed here, and that's like not a central tenet of this book. So it's not really a nonfiction book for me per se, but I think for those that would enjoy this type of nonfiction book, you would enjoy it. Then finally, I have been reading, and I've actually gotten over halfway through Eat the Buddha by Barbara Demick, which was the other one that I was kind of most excited for aside from The Third Rainbow Girl, and this is definitely not disappointing. Honestly, this might even beat out The Third Rainbow Girl by the time I'm finished, just because I'm so thoroughly enjoying this book. And again, like, enjoying is not quite the right word, because this is a really nuanced and complex topic that's being discussed here. But I think this book especially is illuminating to me all the differences between like journalistic integrity that I find that Barbara Demick has and the like complete lack thereof of Christina Lamb in Our Bodies, Their Battlefields. Like, you can tell that Barbara Demick really has taken a lot of care and caution when discussing her informants in writing this book. Like, I think obviously these are people that could, like, the Chinese government could just like decide that you are under house arrest for like kind of discussing some of these topics, and so she's obviously has to tread with great care in discussing a lot of this, and you can really see that shine through in the text, which I really appreciated. I also just find the conflict really interesting. I was not really familiar with Tibet and its relationship to China in the slightest prior to starting this nonfiction book, and so I'm learning a lot. And I do think if you're super familiar with this kind of geopolitical region and this conflict, this book may not be for you, because I do think it has somewhat of a kind of basic level. Like, you can go into this not knowing anything about this conflict and still get a lot out of it, whereas if you know a lot about the conflict, I'm not sure if you would get a lot from this book. But as I said, I don't know much, so I am getting quite a lot. It's very intriguing to me, and it's bringing up a lot of questions of what are the true values of communism and socialism, particularly given that I feel like a lot of Buddhist tenets are like, I feel like a lot of the tenets of the Buddhist like theology are things that are, I see a lot in like US socialist circles, and so it's very intriguing to me because the tenets of Buddhist theology are the antithesis of Chinese communism, and yet they are things that are included in socialism in other countries, and so that's been an interesting thing to think about. Additionally, the ways in which Tibetan culture, particularly in like the 1980s and 90s, where Tibet has kind of better relationships with China than it did right after the Cultural Revolution in the 50s and 60s, but it's still treated as like a sub part of China as opposed to the like eastern part of the country. And there are some discussions of the kind of like cultural tourism that's taking place of some like newly established middle class Chinese, like Eastern Chinese people, or Han Chinese I guess as they're formally known, visiting these kind of Tibetan towns and like kind of playing dress up with Tibetan culture and getting a better sense of what Tibetan culture is like, while Tibetan people are treated as inherently inferior. And so that's bringing up a lot of questions and similarities to the way that a lot of indigenous people in America, but also other ethnic minorities in America, you know, cultural tourism is something that happens for different ethnic groups in America as well. And so there's just a lot of interesting threads here, and I feel like it's done in a really readable and cohesive way. Those are all my updates for now, and I will check in with you next when I've finished one of these two books. Okay, so it's only been a few days since I've last updated you, but it is March 16th right now, and I have another update, so I thought I would film this update while I was also filming another video, and that is that I finished Eat the Buddha by Barbara Demick, and I really enjoyed this one. I'm honestly kind of debating whether I want to put this in the #1 spot or if I want to keep The Third Rainbow Girl in the #1 spot, because I just really thought this was very well done. I give it 4.5 stars, would highly recommend, would be very sad to see it not move into the next round, because I think it is a book that more people should read. I think the thing that I enjoyed the most about this book is the kind of journalistic integrity that Barbara Demick has, both for the culture that she's discussing, but also the individual people that she interviewed, as I feel like there's a lot of compassion here, and she's taken their individual stories and interviews and really interwoven them so beautifully within the larger context of this history and of the conflict between Tibet and China. And I really felt like their stories added a lot to my kind of understanding and personal empathy towards this situation and towards the kind of nuances of this discussion about Tibet and kind of religious freedom more broadly in China, and also just cultural independence and the ideas of that and the complications of that. I thought were all just discussed really, really well in this book. I also just found, as I said previously, that Barbara Demick is a really fantastic journalist, and I think her ability to take very complex information from more kind of academic sources or scholarship on Tibet and Buddhism and other kind of issues within this conflict and kind of break them down into very digestible pieces for a reader such as myself who's not familiar with these topics was also something I really appreciated. Journalism can be used to very much further a specific message, but in a way that feels compassionate and empathetic and very aware of the position that the journalist is in, particularly in discussing foreign politics as someone from the United States. So I think this will end up being my number 2 pick, just because there were parts of The Third Rainbow Girl that I just like really found to be quite moving, but I think the same is also true of Eat the Buddha, and definitely one of my favorites of this group. I would say my top 3, Eat the Buddha, Third Rainbow Girl, and Notes on a Silencing, are all ones that I would recommend to a number of different audiences of kind of just general fans of nonfiction, as I think they all 3 have things that will appeal to different readers of the kind of general nonfiction genre or category, which is less so true I think of the other 3. Hi all, so it is the 28th of March, so the last day of this round, and I wanted to let you know that on Friday, on the 26th, I did finish The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson and submitted my rankings. But this one I ended up only giving 3 stars, which actually put it towards the bottom of my rankings. I think if the right audience read this book, they would enjoy it a lot more than I did. As I mentioned, I think several times throughout this vlog, I'm not a big World War II person, and I don't think that this book had enough kind of intriguing other elements or made World War II as accessible for me as someone who really doesn't care about World War II at all to really enjoy this book, and so it was kind of just fine. It also just went on for a really long time and was very kind of detail oriented, which I don't even think this is the most like detail oriented account of World War II that you could probably find, because World War II is a very well-known, well-researched topic, and so I feel like this book, despite being 500 pages and covering only a year, probably more detail could have been added. I also found, while I was at first intrigued about the kind of familial, personal life aspects of this book that are included throughout the book, talking about Winston and his wife Clementine, and also their children, I also at the same time found that the kind of interspersing of those little pieces of information, particularly after the raids had started in London and the bombings, that Erik Larson sometimes would include those like very personal, totally irrelevant aspects of their lives alongside like talking about all the people that had been killed by the raids, and it just felt like a very weird juxtaposition of those two things, and I wasn't entirely sure that they kind of came together for me in a very satisfying way. So I think that was another reason that I didn't particularly like this one. So I realized I never actually kind of concluded this vlog. It's the 29th of March right now, so the day after that last clip. So I thought I would quickly come on here and wrap up my rankings and ratings for each book without going into any detail, because I went into enough detail throughout the rest of this vlog, just in case anyone just wanted to see my ratings and rankings and not necessarily like the details that went behind all of that. So starting in 6th place, I put Our Bodies, Their Battlefields by Christina Lamb, which I gave 1.5 stars. Then in 5th place, I put The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson, which I gave 3 stars. Then in 4th place, I put Eleanor by David Michaelis, which I gave 4 stars. Then in 3rd place, I put Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford, which I gave 4.25 stars. Then in 2nd place, I put Eat the Buddha by Barbara Demick, which I gave 4.5 stars. And then finally in 1st place, I put The Third Rainbow Girl by Emma Copley Eisenberg, which I gave also 4.5 stars. So those are my ratings and rankings. If you're new to my channel through the Booktube Prize, I would love to have you stick around and subscribe. Please do let me know down in the comment section below if you also judged this round, or if you've read any of these books and want to talk to me about them. I would love to hear your thoughts on any or all of these books, and I hope you're having a great rest of your day whenever you watch this, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.